Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're very excited to have you here with us today. And we're very pleased to welcome you to the 7th and final HHS capacity building training for fiscal year 2023. We appreciate your support over this year and through last year's series of trainings as well. And we really appreciate your support in the Evidence Act activities that we've been doing and all of our activities that we've been doing and that you all have been doing to build capacity, to use and build and develop evidence to inform policymaking. We'll start a new series of evidence capacity building trainings in the fall, and they will focus on specific tools and specific ways to build evidence to support your programmatic, your policy, and your regulatory activities. In other words, we're hoping to give you specific ideas, approaches, and methods for making the Evidence Act and the other relevant requirements that we have really benefit you. Many of the requirements that we have are imposed by other folks, maybe OMB, Congress, etc. But there are a lot of ways that we found to make those requirements work for you as well. How you can make the evaluation plan work for you, the learning agenda, something that really benefits you as well. But this session is focused on how evaluation and performance measurement are related. So during this session, we will review definitions and objectives of evaluation and performance measurement and explain how they can be used together to develop a robust understanding of the effects of programs and policies. By way of housekeeping, and this is similar to all of the other webinars, we are recording this webinar, and so we will make the recording available on the Strategic Planning Resource Center once it is ready. And please submit your questions through the Q&A function. We do have the chat function open, so for those of you that prefer the chat function, you can use that. But please submit questions throughout the webinar, and we will have time at the end as well for your questions so that we can answer your questions. And then we will have a feedback survey at the very end of the webinar. We are very excited to be joined by Dr. Carrie Markovitz. She is a program area director at NORC of the University of Chicago with 25 years of experience conducting both qualitative and quantitative evaluations of youth and community programs for foundations and government agencies. And she specializes on research on youth development and programs that serve at-risk youth. She served as a principal investigator on several large-scale evaluations of programs focused on topics such as at-risk youth, workforce development, violence intervention and prevention, and elementary and early childhood education. And she advises numerous public and nonprofit agencies on evaluation design as well as performance measurement development. So with that, again, I thank all of you for joining us today, and I turn it over to you, Dr. Markovitz.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, ASPE, for such a warm welcome. I really appreciate it. So oftentimes we discuss evaluation and performance measurement as separate activities, with some common purposes. But these two tools are actually highly connected. And they can both inform and direct each other. And so that's what I hope to be able to talk about today. So today, I hope I'll be able to show how these tools can be used together to build evidence in federal programming and in policy monitoring and improvement. So hopefully we'll have the slides up for everyone very soon. Great. Terrific. Okay, so using evaluation to shape performance measurement and vice versa. So let's go to the next slide. So why don't we talk about the agenda? So just real quick, we just did an introduction. We're going to talk about definitions of performance measurement and evaluation just to start. And we're going to talk about the OMB definitions, but also more of the practical definitions so people have a clear understanding of these concepts. And then we're going to talk about understanding when and how to use each of these, the differences between them, and also the similarities, and then how each form can affect the other. So why don't we move to the next slide? Okay, So we're going to do a quick poll. Hopefully this will work. If everyone, we would really appreciate everyone's participation. This just gives us like a feeling for how familiar the audience is with these topics. It's just helpful for our discussion. So how confident are you that you understand the difference between performance measurement and evaluation? Please submit your response. So we have not confident, somewhat confident, mostly confident, or very confident. And we'll give a few minutes for people to respond. I don't know, Emily, if we're able to show in real time how people are responding.
Yep, it should pop up momentarily.
There we go. All right, well, so as expected, we have quite a mix. We're still getting responses, I believe, though. So it looks like the majority of people, about 40% are saying they are somewhat confident. About 20%, almost 20% are very confident. About 16% are not confident. So we're hoping to give you a really good introduction to these topics. And then mostly confident. Okay, so next slide. So we have quite a mix. So hopefully this will be a thorough introduction for some of you and a good review for others. So what is evidence and why is it important? So before we talk about evaluation and performance measurement, we need to talk about evidence. So as you probably are already aware, the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Making Act of 2018, also referred to as the Evidence Act, was established to advance evidence building in the federal government by improving access to data and expanding evaluation capacity. The Evidence Act requires changes to how the federal government manages and uses the information it collects, emphasizing strong agency coordination for strategic use of data. So there is also an increasing push for explicit inclusion and highlighting of evidence in agency budget submissions. So in this presentation, we'll be focusing on evidence-related guidance from the OMB Circular A-11 on the preparation, submission, and execution of the budget. But the concepts and ideas presented also apply to how evidence is used for programmatic and policy monitoring and improvement. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to start with what is evidence? So according to OMB, the OMB definition, evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. So what do we mean by that? So the simpler way to say this is that evidence is facts that support why the activities that a program is doing or a policy is enacting are beneficial and worth the investment. So let's move to the next slide. So why is this important? Well, so evidence is credible, relevant, and actionable evidence of effectiveness is important for supporting the understanding that an agency and its programs are effective and achieving important outcomes. A more concrete way of thinking about this is that evidence helps to justify budgetary decision-making. Why fund this program over that program? Or when budgets are flat or funding is cut, evidence can help us to decide how to make the hard choices and to explain those choices so that stakeholders can understand these decisions we have to make. In addition to its use in decision-making, evidence supports innovation, improvement, and continuous learning in programs and policy. So next slide. So I touched on the fact that, I already mentioned that evidence building is important for sound program and policy decision making in the budget process. But this is, this really should be emphasized that, agencies should strengthen the use of evidence. And OMB expects the agency's budget requests that they will draw on the full range of existing evidence, including program evaluation findings. So this is an expectation now within OMB. And so while OMB expects to see evidence, it understands that due to the complex nature of the outcomes that government is working to affect, that each agency's capacity to impact those outcomes in certain cases may not, agencies may not have enough consistent evidence to characterize progress, or data may be lacking. So it's important to keep this in mind. But so OMB is emphasizing the use of evidence, but at the same time understands that in certain circumstances or cases, agencies can be limited in what they're able to provide. Okay, so that's a little bit of background on evidence. So what does this have to do with performance measurement and evaluation? Why don't we talk a little bit about that? So next slide. So the reason why this is important, or this is connected to performance measurement and evaluation, is that performance measurement and evaluation are two important tools for developing systematic evidence for informing programs and policies. OMB actually identifies 4 components of evidence that include performance measurement and evaluation. The other 2 components are policy analysis and what they call foundational fact finding, which refers to basic or exploratory research. So performance measurement and evaluation are considered 2 important components of the 4 interdisciplinary components of evidence, which inform and direct each other in building evidence. Okay, next slide. So performance measurement and evaluation have a lot of things in common. They both help policymakers and program managers develop or provide systematic evidence of how well policies and programs are working. They can help identify possible program and policy improvements. They can generate information and evidence. And they can both facilitate learning, or they can both together facilitate learning about government activities. So that's what they both do, but then how are they different? And we're going to talk a little bit about that next. Okay, so let's first discuss performance measurement. So according to OMB, performance measurement is the ongoing collection, monitoring, reviewing, and reporting of data on pre-selected measures related to level and type of activities, products, and services delivered, and outcomes of activities. So in other words, performance measurement is the ongoing monitoring and reporting of program accomplishments and progress toward pre-established goals. So for many programs, interventions, or policies, this includes collecting data on the specific activities that are being carried out and the direct products and services that are produced, what we refer to as outputs and outcomes. Performance measurement data help us understand what level of performance is achieved by the program, the intervention, or the policy. So why do we collect these types of data? Performance measures allow program managers and policymakers to determine if activities are meeting a defined level of performance or target. So if an activity is not meeting a stated objective, then this may indicate that adjustments need to be made. In this way, performance measurement can function like an early alert system when significant changes have been made, or when recent changes have been made to a program or a policy. So I offer an example here where my example is with the Senior Companion Program, or what we call, for short, SCP. So the SCP provides supportive and individualized services to homebound older adults. SCP volunteers offer companionship to offset feelings of isolation, but they also provide other supportive services that are necessary for older homebound individuals, such as driving older adults to medical appointments, doing chores around the house, and assisting with shopping for groceries. For the SCP, some examples of performance measures are the number of older adults receiving independent living services, and examples of this might be the number of older adults receiving transportation services, nutrition, food support, assistance with medical appointments, etc. And then another performance measure might be is for this program is the number of older adults receiving companionship services. So these numbers are tracked annually over time as part of the program's performance measures. They can be examined to better understand the number of seniors being served and the types of services being provided over time and how they may change. So that's an example. So now that we talked about performance measurement, we're going to talk a little bit about program evaluation. Now, program evaluation is another form of evidence building, as I said before, but it's different from performance measurement in a number of ways. Program evaluation, as defined by OMB, is individual systematic studies to examine how well all or part of a program, intervention, policy, regulation, or other government activity is working. In other words, program evaluation is an in-depth research activity that answers specific questions or tests hypotheses about program processes or program outcomes. So where performance measurement provides ongoing monitoring and examines progress towards an expected benchmark or goal, the results of a program evaluation enable you to arrive at a judgment of whether the program, intervention, or policy is working or not working as expected. A key difference between performance measurement and program evaluation is that program evaluation helps you understand and explain why you're seeing the program results. Performance measurement doesn't really allow you to be able to do that. In addition, program evaluation can assess the effectiveness of a program, intervention, policy, or regulation compared with its absence or with an alternative approach. So you can compare it with alternatives. It can establish a causal relationship between the activity or program and the outcomes experienced by those affected by the program or policy, which program measurement can't do. And program evaluation can address questions about implementation, variations in effectiveness across different settings or populations, and also contextual factors, which performance measurement is often unable or less able to do. So certainly performance measurement, the information that's collected through performance measurement can be useful and can provide some information about these items, but it can't provide the complete picture necessarily that program evaluation allows for. Okay, so I wanted to return to our example of the SCP Senior Companion Program to give an example of program evaluation. So using this example, we can demonstrate how program evaluation differs from performance measurement in the types of questions that it can be used to answer. So where performance measurement can tell us the number of older adults receiving services and whether these numbers meet specific performance targets, program evaluation can help answer other types of important questions about the program, such as, do older adults in SCP experience improved capacity for independent living? Do older adults in SCP experience increases in social support? Do older adults in the program experience decreases in stress, anxiety, and depression? Do older adults in SCP experience greater levels of independence? And do older adults in SCP experience increases in overall health and well-being? So again, these are questions that program evaluation can answer, but performance measurement data alone cannot. Although performance measurement data can be used in an evaluation to help answer evaluation questions, but we'll discuss, this use of performance measurement within evaluation later in the presentation. Okay, and so, we've talked a little bit about the differences and the uses of performance measurement and program evaluation, but there are some additional differences worth mentioning too. So in performance measurement, the data is largely quantitative. We're usually counting things, number of people participating in a program or number of services provided. In program evaluation, we utilize both qualitative and quantitative data. Also, another difference between the two tools is that performance measurement uses or has data points that are assessed against a target. So we tend to set a target or a goal and then compare what we find in the program to that goal. Or we compare the findings in program measure or the program measurement for that year to past years. So we look at trends over time. Where in program evaluation, data collection and analysis are really guided by the evaluation questions that are being asked. And that's how the data collected and analyzed. In performance measurement, performance measures are generally used to assess trends over time. In program evaluation, we really attempt to isolate findings or impacts from other influences, and that can include bias due to differences over time. Although, sometimes they're, depending on the outcome, they may not experience biases due to time differences. But that can be a difference sometimes between program evaluation and performance measurement. And then a really important difference between the two is that in performance measurement, these types of measures are generally collected by internal staff. They are, easily collected. They're reported usually as either grant or contract requirements, and reported to funders. Where in program evaluation, we really value using an independent outside researcher. That researcher may work collaboratively with a program or an agency, but really provides an outside, unbiased conclusion based on their analysis of the data. So it's really emphasized that you want to use an independent researcher who does not have any type of stake in the findings from the program evaluation, where performance measurement, again, is usually done more in-house by internal staff. Okay, next slide. So just going to look at the chat for a second. See if we have some questions. Okay, so someone asked, are program evaluation questions usually yes, no questions to check whether a goal is achieved or not? I think I don't want to say usually, but I would say that does not sound like a program evaluation question. Program evaluation questions are usually not yes or no questions necessarily. Although sometimes we, ask questions in a way that may ask a question such as, is the program effective or not? But the answer is much more complicated than that. It's not just a yes or no answer, but to check whether a goal is achieved or not. I think that's not typically the way I would describe a program evaluation question. But I think because of the yes/no nature of your question, I think that's what's throwing me off, because I think typically when we answer research questions that are part of an evaluation, it's not typically worded in a way or answered in a way that's more of a yes/no. But we do ask questions sometimes about whether a goal was achieved or not. But then the answer might be much more complicated, I think, than just a yes/no. I hope that answers your question, but we can talk a little bit more about that maybe in the later discussion. Okay. All right, so logic models, performance measurement, and evaluation. So next, we want to explain how logic models are important for informing both performance measurement and evaluation. So we have another poll for you. So I'd like to know how familiar you are with logic models. Your response categories are, I don't know what a logic model is, or I have seen a logic model. The next level is I have used a logic model, and the highest level is I have made a logic model. So please, we would appreciate your response. So it's, I don't know what a logic model is, I have seen a logic model, I have used a logic model, or I have made a logic model. We look forward to seeing your responses. And we'll be posting the answers soon. Okay, we have a very experienced group. 57% said they have made a logic model. That's very impressive. Great. So we have some smaller percentages that have used a logic model, have seen a logic model, and then we have about 11% who don't know what a logic model is. So we are going to do a quick review of logic models. The good news is you don't need to necessarily know a lot about logic models in order to follow the presentation. But I'm happy to answer any questions from the group, because we still do have over about a third of our group that is, or more than a third of our group that is less familiar with logic models. So, okay. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to do a quick review. Okay. So a program logic model is a detailed visual representation of a program. Logic models communicate how a program works by depicting the intended relationships among the resources available to operate the program, the activities the program carries out, and the changes or results the program hopes to achieve, which are referred to as the outputs and the outcomes. So we want to note that logic models come in many sizes and shapes, and also vary in level of detail, ranging from simple to complex. You've probably seen diagrams, circles and arrows and all kinds of things. So they can be very complicated. The components outlined on this slide really reflect a basic or simple logic model design. An important point to think about when developing or reading a logic model is this short-term, medium, and long-term outcome section on the right side. So while short-term outcomes are the first types of changes that we expect to see in those served by the program or policy. So for example, we often talk about change in attitude, then change in behavior, then change in circumstance. That first you have to have a change in attitude, then behavior, then circumstance. Or then, that's like short, medium, long term. So while short-term outcomes, are the first type, for example, a change in attitude, medium term occurs after that. So for example, now that a recipient has a different attitude, they may begin to behave or perform differently. And then long-term can be thought of as now that recipients are behaving differently. So maybe they're now getting preventative checkups, or they're eating more nutritious food. So now their circumstances, such as their health in this case, is better, or their use of emergency services is reduced. So that might be your longer term. So while they occur in a specified order, they are not tied to a specific schedule. So it's not that all short-term outcomes happen in a few months, and all medium-term outcomes occur within a year, and all long-term outcomes occur within 5 years. I've heard language like that used before, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. It's whatever is the right timeline for the specific program or the particular outcome that is applicable to the amount of time that's appropriate for the change in the short, medium, and long-term outcome to occur. So next slide. So I wanted to talk for a second about the differences between outputs and outcomes. This is really important because a lot of times people confuse these, and I get a lot of questions about the difference between outputs and outcomes. And they're both part of logic models. So on the left side of the slide, you can see that program outputs are direct products of a program's activities or services, and they're often expressed numerically or quantified in some way. So these would be things that we often see in performance measurement. So the number attending workshops, the number receiving services, the number receiving referrals. Then on the other hand, on the right side, we have outcomes. And outcomes are changes resulting from a program's activities or services. And those are often expressed in terms of a change in knowledge, attitude, behavior, or condition. And so that you might hear talks of increases or decreases, adoption of new practices, changes in behavior. And so oftentimes outcomes are associated with evaluation, although outcomes, so outputs are always used in performance measurement, while outcomes can sometimes be part of performance measures, but are more typically used in evaluation. So, see, I didn't know, oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't know if Susan wanted to say anything more about that.
I think you've covered it very well, but
Okay.
I think, in the next series of trainings, we will focus more on logic models. For those that have used them, there are a lot of different, maybe new approaches that we can talk about. For those that are not as familiar with them, we can have some workshops and things like that, because for those of you that know me, I think logic models are one of the most important and most valuable tools for program planning And then they really set a foundation for helping us to understand what performance measures we may want to use and what evaluation outcomes we want to measure. But thank you for letting me chime in.
Thank you, Susan. Logic models are a wonderful tool because I find that it's one of the few times where programs and evaluation really intersect well. I find that program people value logic models and the exercise of putting together a logic model to bring their staff all on the same page about goals and outcomes and activities and inputs and all of these important elements of the work that they're doing. But also it's really critical to doing a accurate evaluation of the program too. It's just a really important tool for both evaluation performance measurement and programmatic planning. So logic models as a performance measurement tool. So a logic model can serve as a framework for planning performance measurement activities. So it can help to identify components of a program for performance measurement. And it can be used to identify indicators and the measures of progress / performance that align with program components. So one of the elements that we talked about in the logic model were the outputs, and oftentimes those outputs align with performance measures. So next slide. So logic models are also an evaluation tool. A logic model can serve as a framework for an evaluation. It can help focus the evaluation by identifying what questions the program or agency wants or needs answered. The aspects of the program that we want to evaluate. Oftentimes a process evaluation will focus on what we call the left side of the logic model, the inputs, the activities, the outputs, where an outcome or an impact evaluation may focus on the right side, which is the short, medium, and long-term outcomes. A logic model can also provide information on can identify what information to collect in order to address research questions. It can identify the measures and data collection methods, and logic models can help determine an appropriate time frame for the evaluation. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the fact that outcomes are not always bound by specific times. A short-term outcome doesn't always occur within a few months. It depends on the outcome. It depends on the program. It depends on what's a reasonable amount of time. And so the logic model can also help determine what's a reasonable amount of time to expect for the evaluation, so that you can expect to see a change and be able to observe that for the program, for the evaluation. Okay, next slide. So how performance measurement and evaluation work together. So again, these methods or tools, they really can be used together. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. Next slide. So it is important to keep in mind that performance measurement program evaluation are conducted at all stakeholder levels. And these activities are not mutually exclusive. Programs and activities already engage in both performance measurement and evaluation activities to some extent. An example would be a program may already be collecting data to monitor and report on its progress toward achieving its expected outcomes with service recipients. It is typically the case that the additional program stakeholders will engage in or support additional evaluation activities to learn whether the program's progress on outcomes is related to its intervention. It may be that the program continues to collect the same outcome data as it did for its performance measures, but also includes a matched comparison group And then that ends up becoming an evaluation. And including this comparison group enables the program to answer specific questions related to causality. So in this case, what would have happened if to people if they didn't receive the intervention or received some type of alternative? So that's an example of where performance measurement and evaluation can work together. Next slide. So OMB actually lists a number of ways that performance measurement and evaluation work together. Performance measurement can inform which research questions to include in an evaluation. So it might be the case that you see that certain aspects or elements of a program are performing quite well, and it's time now to invest in a formal evaluation of that component. Evaluation findings can clarify what indicators should be tracked by a program as performance measures. You could do a process evaluation or an exploratory evaluation and find that there's certain promising elements and that now you want to track those over time as part of your performance measures. Evaluation can explain variations found in performance measures over time or across locations. So if you see differences across sites in performance measures, it might be useful to do a formal evaluation to figure out what are the differences between those sites. Is it that they're serving different populations, they're using different approaches, there are promising lessons learned or promising practices that would be useful to document in order to understand what's happening at those sites that are performing at a higher level. Evaluation can confirm or refute whether the program outcomes identified by performance measures are attributable to the program. Performance measurement can suggest to evaluators what types of indicators to include in an evaluation. And that's also an example I'm about to give. So next slide, please. So I have a real example that was done by my organization, NORC. I was the principal investigator of an evaluation years ago for the Minnesota Reading Corps. And so NORC was tasked in 2011 with designing an evaluation of the Minnesota Reading Corps program. And Minnesota Reading Corps trains AmeriCorps members to provide evidence-based literacy enrichment and tutoring services to preschool students and also at-risk kindergarten through third grade students in the state of Minnesota. During the 2013 and to 2014 school year, more than 1,100 AmeriCorps members implemented the Reading Corps program in 712 schools and 213 school districts across the state of Minnesota. There were really two major programs. There's a pre-K program and a K through third tutoring program. Next slide, please. NORC did evaluations of both programs, separate evaluations, but here is a logic model of one of the programs, the K through third component of the Minnesota Reading Corps program. And this component of the program was one of the major program areas that NORC was asked to design an evaluation. So this is an example of a logic model where we have the inputs, activities, outputs, short-term and long-term outcomes. So the inputs, examples of the inputs were the schools. Well, there's a data management system. There was a core curriculum for literacy tutoring. There are on-site literacy coaches that worked with AmeriCorps members that delivered tutoring services to the students. And so, this was several of the inputs of the program. And then there was the overall Minnesota Reading Corps central office staff. And And then the activities included the training, supervision, and coaching of the AmeriCorps members, assessment of students for program eligibility. So they had to assess the students. They had to be performing below benchmark in order to be eligible to receive tutoring. Then there's the delivery of one-on-one tutoring to students, and they received that tutoring for 20 minutes every day, 5 days a week. There was weekly progress monitoring that took place and that had to be charted. And that was also part of their performance measures. Also was this these weekly assessments that were done on students. And then the exiting of students who improve and became on track. So reached benchmark or were above benchmark and then released from the program. The outputs that are tracked by the program in their data. So the outputs that were tracked by the program in their data management system included the length and number of tutoring sessions per student, the student scores on 1-minute weekly progress assessment tests, and student literacy benchmark scores that took place 3 times per year. So in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And then the short-term outcomes were the number and percent of students improving on grade level literacy measures at subsequent benchmark periods in the fall, winter, and spring, and the number and percent of students that successfully exit from the intervention. And then the long-term outcome for the Minnesota Reading Corps, they wanted to increase the number of students who demonstrate proficiency on their state's 3rd grade reading test. So starting in kindergarten, they work with the kids and get them on benchmark with the goal of improving this their performance on the state's 3rd grade reading test. So this is an example of their logic model. Okay, so next slide. So just really quick. So as you can see from the program's logic model, the Minnesota Reading Corps program was collecting comprehensive performance measurement data on its program, including data on a number of tutoring sessions completed by the students, the length of the tutoring sessions. So this information was analyzed as part of a process evaluation and used to design a randomized controlled trial study. So the important finding from the performance measurement data was that the average student completed and exited the program within a single semester. So a delayed intervention could be implemented, meaning that a treatment group could receive tutoring right away in the fall, and then a control group had to wait until the 2nd semester. But the important factor was that every student could receive tutoring, but just some students had to wait until the 2nd semester. So for any school that was oversubscribed, they were able to participate in the evaluation, and all students could be served. And then on the flip side, the findings from the evaluation also importantly from a process evaluation showed that the on-site coach and their time and interaction with the tutor was actually a key determinant of how successful the program was. And so they ended up adding that as a new performance measure to their program. So that was a way that they worked together. And I know I'm a little over time. I'm sorry, Susan.
No, that's okay. You've done a great job. And we do have a couple of questions. So I wanted to absolutely make sure we got to the questions.
Yes.
And always leave a couple of minutes at the end so that people can fill out the feedback form that pops up when we close the webinar before the top of the hour. So one question that we have is related to this study in particular. And did they include fidelity measures? So looking at how closely the intervention was actually implemented according to the way that it was intended to be implemented.
Yes, absolutely. We did a thorough fidelity analyses first. And actually, I have to say, of all the studies I've done for 25 years, I was just so impressed with the amazing consistency they had. They ran a very tight ship, did incredible amounts of of training, but also this on-site coach, and they had a coach from their central staff that went around and visited schools to also make sure that there was fidelity to the program. And so we did a number of site visits to schools to check the fidelity, and it was very impressive.
And that nicely highlights actually another relationship between performance measurement and evaluation, that particularly if you have a complex program, policy, or regulation, or if you have a lot of different sites, it's important to make sure that it is being implemented as intended. Otherwise, your performance measures may be all over the place. They may vary a lot, where an evaluation then can look at that fidelity. Is the program being implemented uniformly and the way that it's supposed to be? So we do have 2 more questions, and any other questions that we get, we will have a frequently asked questions document that we post with these materials. So if you have other questions, certainly put them in the Q&A function and we will get to them. If not today, we will get to them later. But another question, so someone says, thank you for the information so far, and I have an exclamation point. So again, thank you for what you've given us today. You frame evaluation from the lens of research. Do you ever differentiate between the two? Between evaluation and research?
Do I ever differentiate between the two?
Yeah.
Yes, I would say so. I mean, evaluation is, there's a specific framework, I think, within which we conduct evaluation that's different. I mean, research, I think, is a broader term, and evaluation is a part of it. And there's a more specific framework within which we conduct evaluation. But there's definitely basic research, exploratory research, that's not necessarily evaluative. So, I would say that, yes, I do distinguish between the two.
I think as we look at documents from OMB and we look at the executive order on scientific integrity and other things like that, that fits with what you're saying. Evaluation is a type of research, a subset of research, as you said.
Yes, and yes, and it's not, I think OMB values other types of research too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the last question that we have in the chat or in the Q&A is, how many performance measures are recommended for a federal program? And I'll take a cut at that first. I mean, OMB emphasizes for reporting, and as we think about the guidance that we have for our budget documents, a small number of really key performance measures. They do not want an exhaustive list of performance measures for our budget reporting or for that kind of performance measurement system. But for program monitoring, if there are more measures that are important, maybe balancing measures. So in addition to looking at the specific outcomes, there may be other things that change the effect of the program or may make the program more or less effective. So you may want to measure some of those sort of balancing or other types of measures as well. So for management of your program, what works best to meet your needs is the number you should use. But when we think about budget reporting, it is really a handful, a small number, 3 to 5. Of course, it depends on the specifics, but somewhere in that range. Is that also your experience?
Yes. Sometimes I find less is more, as they say, right? That sometimes when you give too much information, that it can be overwhelming and, people don't really get a clear picture. But I would also say that I think it depends also on a number of factors, including if your program is new or it's a new policy, you may want to start with a few measures because that information or may lead you to other types of things that you want to measure. And so you may want to start with a small number, and then expand it or change it later.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. So we are very close to the top of the hour. So I will say thank you so much, Dr. Markovitz, for coming and talking with us today. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. And as soon as we end this webinar, feedback form will pop up, and we really hope that you will fill that out to help us to plan future activities. Thank you.